So speaking of bad teams, let's play a game here, Brad, and let's call some shots. We're gonna guess the top five teams we think that are going to be contenders, if you will, if that's the right word here, to hold the number one pick in the 2025 draft.
Okay.
A draft that we don't think is going to have a number one overall worthy quarterback in it, at first glance. So we'll go here. We'll go 1-1 here. So my number one team that I think is lined up here, it's the same team that's picked number one the last two drafts, the Carolina Panthers. They're still not good. They still haven't done enough to get Bryce Young weapons. And if they pick number one again, are they cutting bait on Bryce Young and starting over again? Their ownership is bad. I mean, he's a very impulsive guy who seems to just be cutting bait on everybody. I like Dave Canal. I like the hire. So we'll see. That's my only reservation is seeing what he did with Baker Mayfield last year. That's my only reservation about, having them at the top of my list. But Carolina, number one.
Well, and I would play a game in this situation. So if Bryce Young stays healthy for 16 games, has a good completion percentage, QBR, like he plays well, but they just don't win games because that defense is not going to help them out. Their offense, the skill positions are weak. I mean, running backs are probably their strength at this point, and that's okay. Tight ends are rough. Wide receivers, they have one decent receiver and then some question marks. If Bryce Young still plays well enough, do you feel comfortable that the team will give him another shot for year three? Or if he's injured, then do they cut bait and go? I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with it. I didn't put Carolina in my top five. But I understand why you put them in the top five, because it could happen. I believe in Bryce Young. And like you said with Dave Canales, I think he could do some really nice things with Bryce Young, because I think Bryce Young's just as smart as Baker, probably just as athletic. Injury issues will be a concern for me just because of how, he's much smaller than I'm Baker. Sorry. So I'm with you. I think they could be, but that would be my question back to you is, if he plays well, do they give him one more year? Or if he gets hurt, do they cut bait? That's where I'm at.
Right. Yeah. Brad, who's your number one contender?
My number one is the New England Patriots, because there's no hope for 2024, but there is hope for the future. I like Gerard Mayo. I like the coaching staff. I like the direction they're going. I like that they got their quarterback now. So if they do go number one next year, they can get their edge rusher. They can go get a James Pierce, or they can get an offensive lineman if they think that's the case, or they can trade back and get some more draft picks. I mean, they've got the quarterback, because I believe Drake May has that, has that potential. So give me New England, because not only do they have a tough schedule, their team is just in rough shape, and they're already trading off assets that could have helped them. I mean, Judon wasn't going to be long for them anyway, but I could see them trading off other guys. I mean, some of these other vets that maybe they think are not going to help them. So I went New England number one. They just seem like in a really rough situation this year.
I had New England number two for all of the reasons that you just mentioned. I think 1 to 53, or if you want to say active game day, 1 to 45, they have the worst roster in the NFL.
Yeah, I couldn't argue.
Or damn close to it.
Yep. I mean, they're absolutely.
Number two for you is the same as number three for me, and that's the Tennessee Titans. Another team who I think is a bottom five roster in the league. They've got holes on offense, holes on defense, and I am not a Will Levis guy, never have been. I love Brian Callahan. I'm glad he got a shot to be the head coach here. And maybe he got the head coach job to try to get the most out of Will Levis. But I think this is a team that's going to be looking at hoping one of these quarterbacks develops into a top echelon draftable pick.
Yeah, Will Levis is one of those guys where I've there've been times where I'm like, man, I really like the attitude, the willingness to just kind of let it rip, the kind of the gunslinger mentality. And then there's times when you watch, and even watching him on the field, some of those games last year, like the Miami one, you're like, oh, he's the rah-rah, like this could work. Then there's other times you're like, why did he do that? that was just a dumb thing, you know. And it's like, can you get consistency? Maybe they can turn him into a thing. I just don't, because teams are so quick to cut bait and move on, especially when it's not their guy. I just don't see him sticking with him very long. So that's why I put them in the top. And their defense is probably going to be the thing that keeps them in games, but injuries have hit some of those guys in the past. So if that happens again, I mean, they could be toast.
Right. Yeah, I agree. All right. Number 3 for you is number 4 for me. So I'll let you go here. And my favorite general manager, Mickey Loomis and the New Orleans Saints, Brad. Derek Carr, man, he ain't it. He is not it at quarterback. I want to see Rattler get a shot, but I mean, even that is, I don't know, man. This roster, at some point, I keep saying this over and over and every year, and it never happens, but the Bills got to come due at some point. Every year they start, even though the cap goes up $40 million every year, they always start every league year like $70 million over the cap.
They are definitely, you could argue they're probably the worst mismanaged team over the last decade, right? I mean, when it comes to handling the money, handling, you know, a lot of those office decisions. So they got lucky that Sean Payton kept them safe for a while there, but you know, they're definitely having to pay their dues at this point. For me, you know, the reason that I would put them as a potential for this is not only because I don't believe that Derek Carr's the thing for them. You know, they just have holes in a lot of spots that you really shouldn't have them. You know, they have concerns in the receiving game, you know, outside of Chris Olave, who's really going to step up and be something for them. On the defensive side, you know, their linebackers aren't bad, but their defensive linemen, there's concerns there. You know, age is catching up to some of their guys. I mean, there's too many questions that I think it probably becomes a problem for them sooner rather than later. And I expect it this year with their schedule, with the division they're in. I think there's teams that can beat them twice, you know, in Atlanta and Tampa, you know, and Carolina. It wouldn't surprise me if they split it with them, you know, and it just doesn't bode well for them if that happens.
Yeah. Jeff Bell had a tweet the other day with a great stat in it. Said Mickey Loomis's GM has 5 playoffs wins in the last 14 seasons, while during that span have spent the most cap space.
Oh, that's terrible.
That is not good ROI on that one. Number 5 for me was Minnesota, and they and this is simply because I am not high on Darnold at all, and I don't know that they are built to. I don't think they're going to be that bad enough to be number 1, but I think if a couple more injuries hit, they could be in a bad way.
Yeah, if Darnold's still seeing ghosts, and I believe in that offensive line more than I believe in Darnold. I think the offensive line can do some things to help him. That was the biggest issue early on in his career. He just didn't have good protection, and he didn't have enough time to make good decisions. So if the coaches can help him and that line can protect him and the injuries don't hit, I think he'd be okay. But I absolutely can understand. I mean, injuries can wreck anybody's season.
4 for you is Arizona.
This really comes down to Kyler not being healthy. I mean, you know, do we get full 16 games or full 17 games out of him? We haven't yet, right? Like, we haven't in a while. So I could see them easily walk right into that number 1 pick.
At that point, they've got to be thinking about getting away from old Roadrunner there.
He can go back to playing Call of Duty.
There you go. And number 5 for you was the Raiders. And I got a feeling this is maybe head coach being in over his head a little bit. Gardner Minshew is a starting quarterback. Various other things. Maybe if this team's this bad, I mean, you got to be moving Adams at the deadline, right?
I'm surprised Adams didn't get traded to New York already. I mean, you know, you heard rumors throughout the training camp season that, you know, they could wind up moving Devontae Adams back with Aaron Rodgers. So, yeah, for me, it does come down to, I don't necessarily think Aiden O'Connell or Minshew is really the answer for them. I think Antonio Pierce isn't a bad coach. I think he needs a better quarterback for sure. I think they made some good decisions along the offensive line, adding some defensive pieces. Draft wasn't too bad. You know, I feel like they made some good decisions there. So it's not that they aren't trending in the right direction. They're in a tough division. You know, Kansas City, obviously, perennial Super Bowl champ. I like the direction Denver's going. You know, the Chargers could wind up getting out of the basement. You know, it's one of those things where they're just in a tough division, and I don't necessarily think their signal caller is going to do them any favors, because we know Minshew can be just as much a gunslinger as he can be a turnover machine. So,
yeah, I mean, it's a fun story. He's fun, but you know, yeah, it's hard not to like the guy. But
he is the Uncle Rico of the NFL.